What's it like being a female expat living in Asia? What does it mean when you raise third culture kids? And how does it feel to go through menopause in Southeast Asia with the amount of heat that you have to deal with? Well, if those questions or anything, in fact, about being an expat are interesting to you, you are in the right place. My name is Wendy, and for more than 3 decades, I've lived and worked in 5 different countries in Asia. And I still live and work in Asia, now in Thailand. And I've been musing this week about a conversation that I had with a friend of mine fairly recently. We were talking about our kind of group of friends, our friendship group. And this friend of mine said to me, well, we're all culturally very similar. We're all the same in this friendship group. And at first I thought, oh, no, that's not true because we have people from different countries. But when I realized that that's pretty much true. And then it made me think about the way that we socialize as expats. And is it true that birds of a feather flock together? And if I'm honest, looking back on my own personal history of being an expat for more than 30 years, I have a feeling that that might play into it. Now, there's a couple of factors that have changed the way that we socialize as expats inside the expatriate community. And I'll talk about where those changes have come in a little while. But if I go back in time to the very first time that I became an expat, so 1988, I was living in Singapore for the very first time that I'd left the country. And at that time, I didn't really socialize. I wasn't there for a very long time, and I didn't really socialize with many people. So I sort of, was with my partner. I knew people that he knew, but I didn't really know too many people. But it would be fair to say that in the 80s in Singapore, Singapore was still a place that held a lot of it's not colonial because Singapore is independent and has been independent since the war, but there was that kind of echo, if you like, of a British existence within the community, or an Australian existence within the community. So the Commonwealth was still very strong. Obviously, there were people from other countries as well, Americans and whatever. But I think it would be fair to say that back in the 80s, the strongest expatriate community was probably British based. And that is true of a number of places in Southeast Asia. And that has historical echoes, like I said. So that was Singapore. Now, after that, pretty quickly after that, I found myself in Macau. And Macau back in the day, and this is the end of the 80s, was still part of Portugal. And it was a very, very small expatriate community, really, really tiny. I had a new baby and I met one other Australian. Now, I'm a New Zealander who grew up in Australia. But I met one woman. She was an Australian. And one of the first things she said to me was, don't expect me to socialize. I don't socialize. And that really left me out on a limb because I was a new mum. This is in the days of, landlines and no internet, no anything like that. And I was really stuck. And I found it very hard and very, very isolating. Now, I did get along to, and I can't remember how I was invited to, a couple of Portuguese dues, if you will. And that was a very interesting thing for me because most of the Portuguese who were there, they were perhaps the wives of some kind of diplomatic corps that was there. And they took that job, their role, very seriously. So I went to I'll never forget, I went to an afternoon tea, and the Portuguese ladies turned up in their furs with all of their finery, completely done in their cars. And back in the day, when Macau was still 3 islands before they reclaimed all of the land, you could basically walk around that island, that one particular island, in about 20 minutes. You certainly didn't need to be driven from your apartment, which was probably a block away, to the event. But it was very important for those ladies to be seen to be playing the role of that. So there I was, this sort of quite young new mum from the Antipodes, turning up to quite a posh event. And I thought, oh, goodness me. And of course, I don't speak Portuguese. So that was a little bit off-putting. And as I said, I found that whole experience a little bit intimidating. But then the next move was over to Hong Kong. And again, we're talking the end of the 80s. And this was before the handover. And it was a very British-centric community. There were, of course, Australians there are New Zealanders there are Americans there are people from everywhere. And Hong Kong being a banking hub, of course, all of the major banks had their nationals there, and you'll find that anywhere in Asia. But keeping in mind that both Hong Kong and Singapore at some point had a kind of a British history, right? So the larger communities were those. Now, I was in Hong Kong that first time for about 4 years, and I got to know lots and lots of people. And I did get to know other expats as well. But in our baby groups, even though, I was working, but in our baby groups, there was an American, and maybe we would see French around, and German people and all of that kind of thing. All of those communities exist within that country, but they did kind of keep to themselves a little bit, and that might be based around language and certainly around cultural touchstones. It wasn't because we didn't like each other. It's just that it's funny how you can have an enclave within an enclave, and I think that that's really, I guess, what I've been thinking about and what I'm talking about here is that expat communities are very welcoming, but they can be a little bit segregated, particularly when it comes to sport, which is fair because New Zealand is the greatest rugby country in the world, and I'll rate Australia as one of the cricketing greats. Fight me in the comments. But even outside of the sporting sphere, those types of cultural touchstones do become very, very important. So that was my first Hong Kong experience. And from there, I went to Malaysia. And back in the day in Malaysia, now we're in the 90s, again, pre-internet, so it wasn't an easy way to find things out. And how it used to work back in the day was usually the companies would know if someone was coming into the country. And this sounds kind of sexist, and I know the younger ones amongst you will sort of be horrified when I talk in this way about separating, girls go to coffee mornings and guys go to work. And it wasn't strictly speaking the case, but it was predominantly the case. Now, I did work in Malaysia, but we can talk about that very briefly. But back in the day, this is how it worked. The company would be told, so-and-so's moving out to run whatever project it is, and then the word would go around, and it was up to the wives to socialize with the new coming trailing spouse, they're called. So, and that was how that worked. And so I went to a few of those things. Now, there was a very strong British Women's Association, again, Malaysia having that British connection. And they used to have these ladies called link ladies who would link you in to what was going on. So there would be a list, these are the best hospitals, this is where we get our hair done, here's the number of a good driver, all of this kind of stuff. These are the schools you're going to send your kids to kind of link you into the community and set you on your way and answer any questions pre-internet. And that was how that worked. In Malaysia, there was also an organisation called the Malaysian Australian New Zealand Association, MANZA. And I'm sure the Americans had an American association and all that kind of stuff. MANZA did, culturally significant things like the Melbourne Cup lunches and all that kind of stuff, Waitangi Day, that kind of stuff. But there was still a kind of a centralising around where you'd come from so that you were in that little bubble. You can understand now why local people sometimes don't know how to connect to expats, particularly back in those times, because not because of racism, or maybe because of racism, or sort of like a not intentional racism, that there were these little enclaves that were kind of tight, I'm going to say. So moving forward, after Malaysia, heading back to Hong Kong, and now we're in the 2000s, and things had started to change. People had mobile phones, the internet was, a thing, and information was out there. So you didn't need to have one person to help you on those first steps to know what to do. You could actually start to find out information for yourself, and there might be sort of other opinions out there. By the time I got back to Hong Kong, where I stayed for a very long time, it was easier to access information and easier to meet other people because of it. So that by the time that I left Hong Kong, I had friends, expat friends and local friends from all around the world. So from the Philippines, or from, local Hong Kong Chinese, or whoever, Germans and Swiss and all that kind of thing. And it's interesting how I think that the internet made a big change there, and also the change in the way things worked. Now, again, I was working in Hong Kong, I was working in the radio industry, yes, in English-speaking radio, but I got to know people from all around the world. So the expat experience had changed. The bubble wasn't as tight a bubble as it was. And certainly after the handover in Hong Kong, a lot of stuff changed as well. The British diplomats and all of the government people were gone, or mostly gone. And so the ones who kind of came in had a different perspective and maybe a different role. And then 10 years ago, I found myself here in Thailand. And this is the first time I've ever not lived in a capital city in Asia. So I'm living in a town. And this is a completely new experience for me. So I arrived not knowing too many people at all. I did have one or two connections before I got here, and I've done this long enough to know how it works. And I was interested to discover that in this town, one of the largest expat groups of all things was Scandinavians. I mean, that would totally blew my mind. Swiss, massive community of Swiss, Germans. There you go. The French, who are all throughout Hong Kong and every other place, and in Vietnam as well, obviously, and places like Laos. Keep thinking historical when you're thinking about current expatriate communities, because it actually does shadow all the way through. So here I get to this town, and oh my God, I found Norwegian restaurants. I'd never even heard of a Norwegian restaurant. And why is that? Well, because in Thailand has strong connections to the Scandinavian communities, and especially the Swiss, because the Thai royal family has a very strong connection to Switzerland. And so Thais know all about Switzerland. They love Switzerland. They had, King Rama IX spent a lot of time in Switzerland. He might have even been educated there. And so there's a very, very strong tie to the parts of Europe that I was a little bit surprised by. And that still exists today. And so when I started up a choir before COVID hit and shut it down, when I started up an English-speaking choir, because guess what, I speak English, I had people from all over the world coming to join this choir, even to the point where one of the members who was German said to me, "I'd like to complain, please, because we don't sing enough German songs." And I said, "That's great, but the only problem is I don't really speak German. So if you want to lead a German song, you go right ahead." But and our pianist was Swiss, and she was absolutely brilliant. She could do that. She could lead us through some other things. So that's a really interesting thing. So where I live now is actually more multicultural than any place that I've ever lived in Asia. Is that a weird thing to say? I think it's a weird thing to say. Now, for my American viewers, and I know there's a big percentage of people who are watching these videos are Americans, and I understand why you're interested in becoming expats. Maybe things at home are a little bit too expensive, or maybe you're just up to here with the news, and if I lived there, I would be too, so I get it. So for my American friends, there are loads of Americans here too. In fact, I've just had, there are, two new American gentlemen, both ex-military, have moved into my street. There you go. So expat communities are multicultural. Do they sometimes clump together? Yes, they do. Is that a bad thing? I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's an understandable thing, given the experiences, but I certainly think that it's worth reaching out and meeting other people. One of the great joys of being an expat is the fact that you do get to meet people from all around the world, and I have been to Scandinavian restaurants and discovered what they have for breakfast, which is all good. So there you go. Just a thought, my musings only. What is it like to be an expat? Well, sometimes it's like being at home, because you're hanging out with all the people that you would at home, and sometimes it's a little bit different. And if you're lucky enough, you'll make some local friends, and I've met some great Thai friends. I work with all Thais, and I absolutely love them to death. I work with wonderful people. They're good people, and all of the local people that I've met as an expat for over 30 years have been really, really joyous. Yeah, just my thoughts. No, apropos nothing. I hope you're having a lovely day. I hope this entertained you, or maybe gave you some insight. Don't be afraid to check out things on the internet. Google is your friend. If you're considering moving to another place, you want to move to Vietnam, or you want to move to Malaysia, or Laos, or I keep saying anywhere but Myanmar right now. Myanmar is brilliant. I have been to Myanmar. Don't move there just yet. We need to get this whole coup business sorted out, and I don't know when that's going to happen. So just be patient. Jai yen yen, as the Thais say. cool your heart. So that's it. If you've got any comments, you'd like to leave them down there below. Please do subscribe. I see 21% of the people who watch my videos are subscribers. Would you like to be part of the higher number? Please do click subscribe, like, and leave a comment. And if there's anything that you'd like me to cover, or you'd like to share the video, just go ahead, do all that sort of stuff. And I wish you a very, very happy day. Speak to you later. Bye.